to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to Talent Optimization. My name is Tracy Shirk, and we are chatting today about hiring staff and what that looks like to attract and retain great staff. And as we get started today, one of the gifts that I want to give you as our listeners is we use something called the predictive index. And there's a behavioral assessment that really tells you who you are, right? And one of the great things about it is as we attract and hire staff, we want to align those staff with who is the individual coming in with what the job needs. And so often we miss this piece about what the job needs and how that is specifically tied to the individual in the role. Because when we have right fit to right role, we are much more likely to have success in this hiring. So my gift to you is this behavioral assessment. And if you want to know more, take the behavioral assessment. You'll find it in our show notes. And then we can have that conversation about how you do that. So with that being said, I have a special guest on the podcast today. And the individual that is joining us today is a co-founder and COO of Resume Sieve, and this is Michael Yinger. Mike has been in talent acquisition for nearly 20 years, providing support and coaching to multiple organizations across the spectrum of industries. So Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tracy. Happy to be here.
Yeah. So, I know we had a number of different conversations about attracting and hiring staff and what that specifically looks like. And one of the things that's so important to this is how we go about doing it, right? I just talked a bit about the job assessment and knowing what the job needs. Because the clients we work with, we actually use that job assessment to help tell us very specifically how to market to the specific job applicant. So how do you use marketing and sales in attracting the best candidate for the role?
Well, it's certainly a hot topic these days with the perceived shortage. Some industries are worse than others in terms of having enough people to fill all the jobs. There are a couple of ways that the concept of marketing and sales have become very prevalent in the talent space. The first is that the tools for marketing, particularly programmatic ad buying, have become much more focused in the talent space, where instead of buying ads in a magazine, what you're doing is you're buying space on a job board. You're buying keywords in Indeed, whatever the case may be. So there's a whole technical side that really comes from the marketing arena. The other part that I've seen in practice much more frequently is the whole concept of that conversation that the recruiter is having with the candidate, which really is a sales conversation, especially today where people have choices. And it's not about just telling them what the job is and telling them what the salary is and then asking them their availability. It's really getting into, do you understand what they need? Have you made a connection with them such that they begin to trust you? And then you can begin to address their needs with possibly what it is that you have to offer in the marketplace. Not everybody's after money these days. We know that. Some people are looking for culture. Some people are looking for a social conscience. Other people are looking for being at home more frequently. So just sort of spewing out all the things that you offer from a benefits perspective, you might totally miss what this person wants, and then they're gone off to somebody else. That's a sales process.
Absolutely. One of the questions that we love to ask with every applicant as soon as we get on the phone with them is, what are you looking for in an organization? And then we follow that up with, what are you looking for in your leader? What are you looking for in your team? And what are you looking for in your job? Because those four things are the greatest drivers to employee engagement. And if we flip it, they're the greatest drivers to employee disengagement.
And just the fact that you pose them as questions as opposed to providing answers really shows you're engaging in a process to make a connection, to have that person tell you what they need. All too often, the recruiting process looks like I tell you what I need and you tell me whether or not you're the right person to fit those needs, versus we need somebody, we need people, whatever flavor they need to be. And what are the things that person is looking for in a job so that I know what to tell them that's going to have them choose us. So I love your approach. The questions are very insightful. They'll tell you a lot about the person, gives you a lot of room to operate. And this is one of the things I've seen particularly lately in training of some recruiters, is to get the recruiters comfortable with asking questions as opposed to providing information. And because there's a kind of a role reversal there where it's so much easier just to tell somebody about it as opposed to digging in a little bit and really understanding where that person's coming from.
Absolutely. And not only that, then by asking those 4 questions, what's happening is they're telling you if they are a fit to the role, if they are a fit to the organization, and if their behavioral styles will potentially fit with what you're looking for, right? So just those 4 questions, and I'm going to repeat them because I hear my listeners saying, wait, what were they again? So, the 4 questions are asking that specific applicant, what are you looking for in an organization? What are you looking for in your leader? You can substitute that for manager, right? But what are you looking for in that leader? What specifically are you looking for in the team you're working with? And then what are you looking for in the job? Because again, those will tell you what that is. And then you're not asking leading questions, which goes right back to what you were saying, is when we ask leading questions, if they really want the job, regardless as to if they're going to be happy in it or not, they may not answer those in the way that is the best for the organization.
You're qualifying the lead, which is a sales process. Qualifying the lead. Is this, does it fit? Can we afford it? Is it the right kind of solution? Whatever the case may be. It's something that I'm starting to see folks in talent acquisition focus on. And again, it is a real shift, and it requires some training of the folks who are in that conversation, because it's just not what they're used to doing. Asking questions, getting to those real fundamentals, it's all part of the qualification process.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And the fact that the other piece of this is we know that the majority of individuals, over 90% of individuals, are open for new opportunities. But, the stat I found was 39% are looking. I think the stat you gave me was 25% are looking. So there's a little bit of distinction there.
Yeah.
But once we have someone in that conversation, whether they've been tapped on the shoulder or whatnot, because just job posting anymore isn't going to attract them.
Right. You're not going to find them. The people you're going to hit you for the job postings are the 25% who are actively looking. And often what you want, I heard another stat, so we'll trade stats here just a little bit. Heard another stat. 63% of the people working in the US are considering a job change. Now, that doesn't mean they're actively looking, but it does mean that they would be open to a conversation if the right person comes to them. I was talking to a mid-level executive earlier today, and he just took another job. He wasn't out looking. He was very happy where he was. And this other company came to him and said, look, we have a job we think is perfect for you. So it's that passive conversation, because you got to really be able to make sure you've got the right connection. Otherwise, you blow the opportunity. And in some industries, the cost of bringing a candidate into a conversation can be very expensive. Mm-hmm. That's one of those, in theory, that's one of those relatively controllable costs in recruiting. If you're able to reduce the number of leads that you need to get the number of employees that you need to hire, you're going to pull down the whole cost of your recruiting operation, the cost per hire. I've seen some industries as high as $4,000 just for the lead. Mm-hmm. Wow. That's, imagine if you just reduced it by 5%. Instead of converting 1 in 40, you were converting 1 in 37.
Yeah.
It's an amazing opportunity for recruitment. And that's not to say that things are easy today, because again, we've got that mismatch between the number of people who are available to work and the number of jobs that are out there, where there are more jobs than there are people who are available to work. So you got to take advantage of that conversation. Your point, making sure you got the right person in the first place, but then not losing them because you're meeting them where they want to be, not where you want to be.
Exactly. I've got 2 points based on what you just said. And I love what you just said about that, meeting them where they need to be versus where you want to be, right? So, and this might take us into a retention conversation as well.
Right.
And then I'll go back to my first point, which was specifically about hiring. So don't let me lose that thought.
Okay.
But with this retention, I just got off the phone with a client, and what she said was, I just had an employee come to me. We required her to come back to work because that is what our leadership team had decided. So she came to me yesterday and said, hey, I want more money, and I really miss the flexibility. And my response to her was, does she really need to be working in the office, or can she work from home? And I also knew her behavioral style from the predictive index. And what I know about this individual is that she's very, very process focused, and she's very detail oriented. What that means is, if you're interrupted in an office all day long, it might take you 2 hours to get back to work once you're interrupted. And if you're very detail oriented, it means that deadlines are non-negotiable. So if she's interrupted all day and not able to be as productive as what she believes she can, she's going to have this anxiety and this knot in her stomach all the time. So the question I had for my client was, is not allowing her to work from home a couple of days a week actually decreasing her work performance and disengaging her from what she's doing? And she's like, oh my gosh, I never thought of it that way. But I really want our listeners to think about that, because it has a huge impact on retention.
It's really, really insightful way of looking at it. It's amazing the things potentially that we have learned as a result of the situation we've been through with COVID, where, in the past, would we have even considered that possibility that working from home would actually be more productive than working in the office? No, you just bring everybody into the office because that's what you do. And it's the old square peg in the round hole routine. And eventually that person would find a situation that works for them somewhere else.
Yeah.
So getting to your point about retention, I'm a firm believer that retention starts with recruiting.
Yes.
It's getting the right people in, getting them situated, and then they're going to be successful. If all you're doing is filling a quota and putting bodies in seats, then you're going to be faced with attrition, which has its cost and pain, both for the individual and the organization. A little more time, a little more focus, and you're bringing in the right people for the job. You say, well, it increases the time to hire. Well, not necessarily. If you're able to weed through those that aren't appropriate more quickly and get down to that short list of those who are, and then you're better off anyway. You're always better off if you get people to stay, and they're staying for the right reasons because you've been able to meet their needs, their requirements as part of the recruitment process.
Absolutely. And getting to know who they are, not just the specifics of, do you have the skill set to do this job, right? It's like, I say this all the time and I always get a laugh. It is, we hire individuals for what they know, yet we fire them for who they are.
Yeah.
Right?
I like that. Yeah.
And so looking at that, like same with this example from the client that I just shared, it is looking at that and saying, hey, she's very process oriented. The job needs her to be very process oriented, and the job needs her to be very detail oriented. How do we create the container for her to be successful?
Right. And you're not going to meet everybody's needs. That's true. Not everybody's going to fit. And the little accommodations can make a whole bunch of difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So the point that I didn't want to forget, and then I'm going to tie this into a couple points that we had chatted about, was, when we know what the behavioral traits of an individual are, we can actually write the job ads specifically to them. We can also use that language within our network. So you talked about $4,000 just, to get a lead. And something we found is when we can talk about a job, so essentially, hey, are you someone that loves to have everything aligned and everything in order and nothing out of place? And are you an individual that also loves physical activity? Do you love working out? Do you love hiking or biking or those things? Guess what? We have a job for you. Here's specific. Then somebody who is that hiker biker that is very detail oriented is going to go, they're talking directly to me, right? But not only that, then once we know that, we're going to attract those individuals to us. We're also going to repel the folks that do not align with that, which means we're not going to get as many applications in the door, but we're going to get better quality applicants in the door. And that's something that, I think is beautiful as we have those conversations. Then once we do that, as we bring them into the organization and onboard them, we're going to onboard them the way they need to be onboarded. And I know that you've got a couple stories about this as well, and how you've done this in your career too.
What you're describing, of course, is the marketing side, back to the very beginning of our conversation. If you get the right people to apply, the process is easier. And the onboarding process should be tailored to what the job entails, so that somebody is, it's a realistic kind of thing. All too often, that most of the onboarding stories ends up being horror stories, right? You throw somebody in a room in front of a computer and say, okay, watch these 45 videos for the next 2 weeks and hope that some of it sticks. I looked at some really interesting software the other day that focuses on bite-sized learning that reinforces the messaging, because it takes us several times for things to sink in. There was an article in Forbes just recently that said it's no longer 7 times, it's now 100. We have to be told something 100 times before it's, well, I hope that's not literally true. But the point is, we've become this bite-sized culture. And you can either embrace that and recognize that we're looking at multiple screens, we're looking at short bits, we're reading the headlines, not the body of the article. Or you can stick with the traditional, and you're going to lose people. So you got to have some flexibility in how you're considering bringing those people in, and how you're working with them, or you lose them. And there's the retention, right? Thinking about what's it going to take. And it fits right in. If you've created a realistic job description, something that describes, maybe metaphorically, as you did, what the job is like, then your training needs to mirror that, so that you don't come away with somebody having unmet expectations. Well, I applied for this job that talked about bike riding, maybe not literally, but again, metaphorically. If the training is filling out forms and tick boxes and whatnot, not at all about being loose and free and whatnot, you run a real challenge of turning them off in the training process. And right. I hear stories, it used to be ghosting just wasn't showing up for the interview. Ghosting is not coming back to the second day of orientation. And that happens. And there's a huge cost in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you've already gone through the entire onboarding process and the background check process and all the things that go along with that.
Yeah, absolutely. All the money, you spend all the money, and they walk. Well, okay.
And I think that there's times too where individuals come aboard and they are they're doing amazing in the role, but they're not loving it. Like, how do you handle those situations?
Yeah, there's some training that I helped develop that looks at coaching in management. The role of the manager, I think, metaphorically, is that of the coach. You're not doing all the work. Well, if you are, then you're not a very good manager, right? You haven't delegated properly. And so part of coaching is not only making sure that people are doing it in a certain way and getting it done within a certain time, but also the goals of that individual are aligned with what you're going to do organizationally. So let's say you got somebody, they're doing a great job what they're doing. I don't know, you're a legal data firm, right? You're, something like LexisNexis. I'm not picking on LexisNexis, it just happened to come to mind. But what this person really wants to do is to be a chef. Now, they're really good at research, but it's not just because they're smart. And so part of being a good manager, being a good coach, is understanding what the motivation of that person is, because maybe the best thing for you, organization, best thing for them, employee, is to move on. I love the metaphor of the square peg in the round hole, mostly because people don't think about, well, if, the peg is usually the person, right? You're trying to shove a peg in a hole. Well, think about, there's not only the damage to the peg, but there's the damage to the hole. So the organization suffers when you're trying to force somebody to do something that they're really not suited for. And maybe there's something else somewhere in the organization. Or maybe it is just that they need to find something else. And sometimes the best thing you can do is to help somebody gracefully find whatever that is, because you're going to be better off as an organization rather than fighting it all the time. Even if they're doing the work, there's going to be difficulties, right? There are going to be challenges. The handovers aren't going to be clean. There's going to be something that's not perfect out of it. And that's part of the manager's job, is to be thinking about that as much as how do you make them productive? It's, are they really the right fit? Especially once you've been through the hiring process, you've done the best you can selecting, but people are going to get through where it wasn't the right fit.
We tend to call those happy alumni. How do we create the happy alumni to ensure that, there's times where we need to create the pathways out of the organization. But with that, we want to ensure that they will refer individuals back to the organization. And maybe somewhere down the line, things will cross. But when you look at that and we go back to recruitment, guess where your best referral sources come from is employees and happy alumni.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when you create happy alumni, you can pull them back in. And much like your conversation about the chef, who wants to be a chef but's in this role, it might be, I know you want to be a chef. Tell me more about that. Mm-hmm. How can we support you? Maybe it's a 40-hour-a-week job they're in right now, and they don't feel like they can make the money as being a chef at this point, or go to school to get their chef whatever at this point. So maybe the conversation is, what does 20 hours a week look like so you can do an and both to truly be successful?
I love to see that kind of flexibility. It's something that I've used over the course of my career, and it's surprising how organizations can be structurally against it. I think one of the greatest things in the world was when the idea of job sharing became more prevalent. And I had a couple of people working for me. One worked in the mornings, one worked in the afternoon. They had a half-hour overlap. There was a process of what they were handing over to each other. And it was a perfect fit for these two people. Not everybody's, it's got, that kind of thing's not going to work for everybody. It's, do you have the organizational fortitude to be flexible? And some companies do, some companies don't. And it's not just small companies. That was a fairly big company that I was working for, that we were willing to take that kind of a stance with somebody. It really shows where your focus is. Your focus, there's a great book written by a CEO that inverts the pyramid, where the bottom of the pyramid are the employees, and you got to support the employees because at the top of the pyramid are the customers. And so if you're not supporting the bottom of the pyramid, then your customers aren't getting any support. And it's really, really critical to have that kind of flexibility, especially now where A, the opportunities are there for people to leave, and B, the cost of replacement is so huge.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get to our key takeaways, it's also looking at this in the recruitment process. I just hired someone for an administrative coordinator position, who's leaving a teaching job. And I could sense the love she has for her kiddos. And I said to her, what would it look like if I brought you on at 15 hours a week right now for you to finish out the school year and leave these kids whole and complete, and you to leave whole and complete with a school year? She got tears in her eyes, and she's like, thank you so much.
Yeah. Exactly. And so now think of the goodwill that you just created with that small bit of flexibility.
Right.
She's probably going to work more than 15 hours a week for you. She's going to work harder at that. And once she comes on full time, she's going to have this tremendous attitude, recognizing that you cared for what was happening with her, not just for the work that she was going to do for you.
Right.
Yeah. Super.
So the plate behind me says, I wonder what's on their plate that I don't yet know about, and I think it's so important to ask those key questions all throughout the process. So I'm curious, what do you believe is a key takeaway for our executives listening in today?
I think we go back to the very beginning of the conversation, Tracy, which is recognize that recruiting is a sales process. That's not a bad thing. That's just a mindset in terms of how you approach that recruiting conversation and how you take advantage of some of the tools that are coming on the market. You're trying to convince people to buy you. That's what you're trying to do. And so that's a sales process. It's not a telling process. It's an asking process. And I think that these are not huge changes that you need to make. And quite frankly, I've seen recruiters, as they begin to embrace this, it's almost liberating, because now all of a sudden you don't have to have all the answers. You have to have some good questions. And it's really about just making sure that you're really getting to what is it that the person wants. So it's a sales process.
Absolutely. And what's a takeaway for our HR listeners?
Have the flexibility built into your system that you can handle people who need something different. And, we both had some examples of that. It really takes a good partnership with HR. If you're going to have two people split a job, what happens to the benefits and what happens to vacation and all those little kinds of things that you need to think about in advance. And that's where HR is going to come in, helping you set those kinds of things up. As you talk about creating good alumni, who's keeping track of the alumni? Who's reaching out to them if you are? There are tools that are available to create an alumni talent pool that can be very valuable as both as a referral source, as you already pointed out, and perhaps as a rehire source a little bit further down the line. Why lose those resources if you can help it? There have been some companies that have done a good job with that. Salesforce, for example, using their own tools is known for that. But it takes engagement with HR at that point to really make that happen.
And a good tool that allows you to go back and see who applied for jobs previously for your recruiters to reach out to that weren't hired then. Because what the data tells us is that, individuals that you call that have applied with your organization previously are 40% more likely to pick up the phone.
Yeah, I think it's really true that there's gold, in that list of people that weren't accepted. And there are tools for that. There's candidate relationship management tools and so forth that really, once you've gone to the trouble to uncover these people, particularly the ones that you actually talk to, that's valuable information. That's a valuable commodity for you to use the next time around rather than just starting everything from scratch.
Absolutely. So as we close today, I want our listeners to know where to find you. And we'll have in the show notes, LinkedIn and Facebook, but also your website. You have a 30-day free trial. Just, in 30 seconds, do you want to tell us about that?
Sure. So we have an application, it's called the Sieve, that works at the front end of the recruiting funnel, evaluating and ranking candidates. Now, this can be done standalone, can be done in conjunction with an applicant tracking system, or as we were just talking about with a CRM. Our website is resumesieve.com, just resumesieve.com. You can see what's going on there. You can reach me at michael@resumesieve.com and be happy to talk with you. If you get to our website, you can book a demo, or as you suggest, you can go ahead and book a 30-day trial. Love to show people how you can do what you just described, which is mining some of that old information. That's really helpful.
Yeah, because it's super important. So thank you so much for joining us today. And again, that free tool that we have, which is the Predictive Index Behavioral Assessment, is in the show notes. It's also on our website. And if you're looking for how do we really create that process, which is what we've been talking about today, from how do we think differently? How do we ask those questions? From that leadership perspective, our Hire program is launching soon, and that is perfectly paired with something like Resume Sieve, right? Because we are not a software, but what we are is we do allow you to look specifically at those processes and the people in the processes, meaning your HR, and how they are being in this process to truly be successful. So, Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. And look forward to continuing the conversation online on LinkedIn as this is posted there and seeing kind of what our listeners really think and what they're doing to be successful.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.